This is the John Oakley Show podcast.
I'm Peter Sherman, and here's what's on the Oakley Show podcast for Thursday, December 3rd, 2020. Shawn Zigelstein of Royal LePage talks about Canadians' financial support for loved ones when buying a home during the pandemic. Dr. Colin Furness discusses the big questions about the vaccine rollout in Ontario. And Jennifer Brown, president of the Elementary Teachers of Toronto, comments on teachers walking off the job amid a COVID-19 outbreak at the school. All of this starts now. You know that old expression, when the going gets tough, the tough get going? It popped into my head as I was reading some of the results of a survey that Royal Bank, or RBC, home buying area, the mortgage people and so forth, they do a poll. It's called the RBC Home Buying Sentiment Poll, and it says a lot of things. I'll just give you a taste of it, and then we'll introduce a guest who will help us understand it a bit more. It provides updates on perceptions and sentiments related to the housing market, and you know what it found? 47% of Canadians surveyed are worried that their financial position may deteriorate over the next year. And even though over 3/4 of respondents are concerned about the financial impacts of COVID and are trying to limit their spending, 3/4, roughly 1/3 would be willing to help their kids or an immediate family member pay for a new home, 31%. They'd fork over the money, even if they were close to not having it. Almost 1/2 are also willing to help their child or family member with rent if they were asked. 1/4 of Canadians polled said they were having to provide more financial support to their family as a result of the pandemic, and when called upon, Canadians that were willing to provide financial assistance were willing to give their kids an immediate family member as well, an average of about $60,000 to support a home purchase. That says something about Canadians. It says something about family. It says something about people close to you. And it says something about how far you'd go even in hard times, which is pretty amazing. And to talk about it, we've asked Shawn Zigelstein, a broker with Team Zold and Royal LePage, Your Community Realty, to join us. Shawn, welcome to the program.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
I'm great, and I hope you're doing well in these difficult and cool times. You heard my little introduction, and I know you've read the survey. You're in the business. We're rocking in the real estate market, aren't we?
We certainly are, with Toronto Real Estate Board numbers coming out today, and we're seeing substantial growth across all aspects of the market. When it comes to single family homes, it's pretty amazing that anybody can afford it these days.
It is, and I'm interested to know, you deal with people when you're dealing with somebody wanting to buy a home, particularly younger people, but not necessarily always younger. You hear about their financing plans. You hear how they're going to put things together so that they can afford the, pick a number, $1 million, which, by the way, I'm not overstating the case in Toronto. That's not the greatest home you ever bought. That's hard to do for a lot of people, and it's harder to do now. And yet you're there, and Treb is there saying, it's just going up. It just keeps on going up, prices and sales. How do you explain this? Is this a Canadian mentality thing?
Well, I think it is a Canadian mentality thing, and I think that it's also, the fact of who we are as people, not just Canadians, but, the immigration that we've had to this country over the years of what we're built on, is so many people just want to see the next generation succeed, and some of them will be, willing to do that on sacrifice of their own end as well. So they will give out money to their kids, to their family members in order to, make sure that they have something that maybe they didn't have at that point.
I think most generations do that. What I'm surprised at is that we've narrowed it down in this survey. I shouldn't say we. I wasn't part of it, but I'm reading it. A little over $60,000 on average, so it could be much more than that, could be a little less than that, that people who are not necessarily the wealthiest people in the world are willing to hand off to somebody who really is trying to make it. That impresses me. So I'm just wondering if this market is going to keep on doing what it's doing forever, because you and I both know something, and this is a basic fact that transcends homes and anything else you want to buy. The big monster bubble in the breakdown of the demographics of our country is still the baby boomers, but the baby boomers are getting pretty old. And so what we're talking about, and it started, is the largest handoff of wealth in the history of mankind from the boomers to the millennial offspring, which means to me that because the boomers were pretty successful for a lot of years. I think the housing market in Toronto is just going to keep on going and keep on going. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't think we're seeing a sign of any slowdown right now, especially with extremely low interest rates. They've never been this low. And what we're also seeing a lot of the time is not just a transfer of the money that's taking place in this report, but actually with the housing itself. So a lot of parents will say, okay, you know what? Kids, you guys want this house, you guys can have this house, we're going to live here for X amount of time, or we're going to live, in a basement apartment, and you guys can move upstairs. So they will adjust their living strategy a little bit in order to help their children become a little bit more successful, because again, when I bought my first house for $200,000, 20 years ago, you can't find that anymore. And really, rates of employment and income have not jumped at the same price that the houses have. That's for sure.
No, it's incredible. My first home, well, I won't tell you about my first home because it was in Montreal, but to give you a comparison, my first one in Toronto was $245,000, and I noticed it sold last year for $1.7 million. Now, I made more money over the years when I was working full-time in Toronto, but I sure as hell didn't make 6 times the money. And that's what we're talking about in terms of appreciation of value.
Yeah, we really are. And I think that, children, some of them don't want to ask parents for help. Others will ask parents for help. And I think it's just different personalities and different people, of course, with any setting. I think that a lot of people will, if the parents have said, look, we're going to help you out no matter what, then great, no problem. But I've got lots of clients that will say, I really don't want to bug my parents because I don't want to put them in that future position of not having the money that they need, whether it's going to be, long-term care, retirement homes or such like that they're going to need the money for themselves. So a lot of the, I find a lot of the kids don't want to put their parents in that position at this point.
Well, we boomers are a nasty bunch, We're going to live to 95. And I'm not even kidding you. I mean, people really are living up into those age ranges these days. And so when you're thinking about money when you're that age, you're thinking about how long you have to depend on something to create cash flow so you can actually buy food. Whereas when young people go to buy a home, I'm looking at numbers here that say only 24% of all respondents can do a home purchase by themselves, which means the other 3/4 are dependent on somebody. Could be a bank for a mortgage, could be a mortgage broker, a private lender, and it certainly could be parents, yes?
Yes, I agree. And also, a lot of them will just end up renting for a lot longer. Even though home ownership is very important to Canadians and the younger generation today wants to get into homes, a lot of them are stuck either renting themselves or they will buy a property with income potential in order to offset some of those additional costs of extra mortgage space in there. So if they can rent out a basement apartment or get a duplex or a triplex, that they're able to live in one of the units and rent the other in order to supplement some of those costs, it will become a little bit more beneficial for them from a cash standpoint.
Quick question off topic of the survey, but on topic for what you do for a living. I hear that the condo market is a little soft these days in Toronto.
Well, the condo market in Toronto is really interesting because we've had so much inventory lately hit the market that it has slowed down a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily call it soft, but there are opportunities out there. So we've got some more inventory that's popped onto the market. We've also got a lot of people that have rented out the properties or planned to flip them. And then, of course, we're stuck in this pandemic where people can't do short-term rentals or they can't get the rent that they were expecting. A lot of those are going to Yeah, rents are definitely down, and those are going to flood the market a little bit, that we're going to see some people, put it on the market because they can't get the rents that they were making before in order to cover those costs.
Got it. Thanks so much for joining us today. Your information has been interesting.
Thanks a lot, Peter. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
It's a pleasure. You too. Shawn Zigelstein, broker, Teams Old and Royal LePage, Your Community Realty, joining us and talking a little bit about RBC's survey on the housing market. I am Peter Sherman in actually for the next 5 days. So today and tomorrow, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, while Mr. Oakley takes some time off. And we're taking care of the news of the day, seeing what you think of it, making sure you understand it, giving you an opportunity to assess it. That's what we do here. And right now, I want to continue the discussion a little bit about vaccines, their distribution, how we're handling it in Ontario, at least what we know of that so far. The task force under General Hillier being announced tomorrow to supervise distribution and storage and all the logistics involved in getting vaccines out to almost 15 million people, or at least the percentage of people who want them, and in what order. And to help us understand, a frequent guest since the pandemic began anyway, Dr. Colin Furness joins us. He of the University of Toronto. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Pleasure to have you aboard again. Always nice to talk to you because you make it nice and simple. So make this nice and simple. I'm listening to various levels of government tell me about vaccine rollout of a vaccine that we don't have and that we don't know when we're going to have, because it seems to me that the companies that manufacture it, or them, because there are numbers of vaccines, have to have them approved by Health Canada. We haven't been given a date for that. And I would think in the interim, there are other countries that are receiving vaccines because they have taken care of the approval process. Have I got this right?
More or less, yes. Every country has to decide where to draw the line in terms of safety approvals. I have been critical of Health Canada on a number of fronts because I think they have been slow to problem solve, and I think they have been a little bit out of touch. However, when we get into the idea of vaccines, which are so complicated and where safety issues are so important, simply following, say, what the U.S. FDA has to say may not be the smartest course of action. I'm not convinced that the FDA is not subject to political interference. We've seen that quite in a disturbing way in the U.S. So that's a long way of saying I'm glad that Health Canada is taking its time because we need to be absolutely sure that we are comfortable distributing this to the population.
Well, it strikes me as a layman, Dr. Furness, that being absolutely sure is a bit of a stretch in the sense that here we are in early December, dealing with an illness that affected our population beginning, in late February, and peaked in summer, dropped back, and is now peaking more seriously in these current times. And we have a vaccine, which I earlier in the program called a major, not a minor, a major miracle, in the sense of not just one vaccine, but 3, I think, that are up for approval now and more on the way. And you're obviously correct. You know your business better than I do. This is pretty complex stuff, and some of these vaccines are not just like your old polio or smallpox vaccines. These are magic science creations, science fiction almost, that has become science fact, like using something called memory RNA to essentially rewrite codes inside your cells that make it react in a way that tells COVID-19 that it's not wanted here. I mean, I put that in layman's terms, but that's what I understand it to be. How do you, if you're Health Canada or the U.S. FDA or the British authorities who have also seen fit to approve these vaccines, and I mentioned a friend from Belgium who has been told by his government, you're getting it in January, it's approved, and they make it in Belgium, so he's going to get it. Lots of countries, not Canada. How do we know in the short span of time that we've got that even if they put it through rigorous tests, whatever those may be, in a matter of a couple of weeks, that when you give it to 1 million, 2 million, 10 million people, you're not going to get unexpected consequences?
Well, you're absolutely right. These miracle vaccines, in a couple of cases, are based on totally new ways of doing immunity building, and it's taking a page out of the virus's own playbook. It's pretty amazing stuff, and because it is novel, we do have to be extra concerned. You're absolutely right about all that. What Health Canada does is not their own data collection, so they're not going to be injecting anyone to see what happens. That work's been done, and it's been done on tens of thousands of people. What they're doing is looking at the research design, they're looking at the data, they're looking at the specific adverse health effects, and they're making their own determination about risk on that basis. So it's a question of taking the same data that everyone gets to see and deciding whether that data is sufficient. We don't know if the vaccine works on kids, for example, right? That research hasn't been done. So what are we going to do? Are we going to give this to kids or not? That's an example of a decision that we need to make. Other countries may have already made that decision one way or another, but we need to own that sort of decision.
Okay. Tomorrow we're going to hear that General Hillier is surrounded by a panel of ostensibly experts. I mean, I don't know their names yet, but we'll find out tomorrow, creating a task force that will deal with order of preference on who gets the vaccine, when it arrives. Obviously, what arrives when it arrives will not be sufficient to go to everyone in Ontario simultaneously. It's going to take some time. What is your realistic expectation of what we should be expecting? In other words, our listeners are looking to you as an expert and saying, okay, you know what you're talking about more than we do. Should we think that mainstream Ontarians will be getting a needle in their arm containing one of these miracle cures? Well, I shouldn't say miracle cures, miracle preventives, anytime, say, between now and April?
That would be very aggressive, and I doubt it. There's no one right way to prioritize vaccines. You kind of have to decide what your goals are. Are you going to try and slow death? Or are you going to try and slow spread? Those are two very different goals. I mean, one of them keeps people alive. The other keeps our health system intact. So that's complicated right there. And then once you've made that decision, and I'm pretty sure we're going to start. I'm pretty sure we're going to start with the folks who are elderly and most vulnerable to serious COVID. There are 3 million people in Canada age 75 and older. If we add people who are younger but have comorbidities, and then if we add healthcare workers and frontline responders, if we add all the people who we really genuinely believe need to be at the front of the line, that's millions across Canada, and obviously Ontario shares almost a third of that. So that's a lot of people, and the vaccine's going to come trickling in. So if you're not in a priority group, the odds of getting this before April strike me as being very low. The good news is, though, that by April, if you can call it good news, by April the weather starts to warm. By April the wind is at our back. COVID will start to retreat. So at the same time that we're going to see the most vulnerable among us get protected, I would expect to see daily case counts start to fall. By the time we get into midsummer, I think we should be enjoying something that feels maybe not quite normal, but getting there. And I think the goal, I think what we should be looking for is that the rank and file, that ordinary Ontarians are all jabbed by before the start of flu season next year, so sometime in the fall. And I think that would be success in my mind.
So when Prime Minister Trudeau said a week ago or so that he expected everybody who wanted the vaccine would have it by September, he was being more or less realistic with us.
Yeah, and I'm glad he said people who want it, because there's going to be people who have vaccine hesitancy, and I'm not concerned about that because we don't need to vaccinate everyone to protect everyone. Herd immunity works that way. Given how effective the vaccine is, I mean, in the mid-90s, which is remarkable, by the time we get 3/4 of the population done, we could say that we have controlled this. And then people who don't want the vaccine, who are fine getting COVID, well, that's okay. They can make that choice as long as we're able to protect all the people who have decided they don't want to get COVID. So yes, September still feels a little bit aggressive, but plausible.
So if you were the task force of one, number one recipient would be?
I'd go for the oldest, most vulnerable, because it's just so horrible to watch. But I would also go to again, healthcare workers, frontline responders, and I would go to marginal populations who've been ignored by governments, homeless. There's all kinds of shelters, correctional institutions. What happened in Ontario with migrant farm workers is something that we should never forget, what we let happen. So I think there's a lot of social injustice we really need to orient to. So I would prioritize all of those. Along with first responders and frontline healthcare workers, we can add in people who do home visits. Like, there's quite a lot of people who work in healthcare and in allied health who are at risk. I would put dentists in that category, for example, because they're working on people with open mouths. So there's a long list of healthcare and allied health, marginalized populations, and obviously the oldest and most vulnerable among us.
Can't come fast enough. Thank you so much, Dr. Furness.
No, my pleasure.
All right, we'll talk to you again. Dr. Colin Furness of the University of Toronto, and telling us a little bit about what we can expect and what he thinks is going to happen realistically. He doesn't have a lock on the information, but he certainly knows about the business of vaccines, and we appreciate him joining us. In a moment, we'll be joined by Jennifer Brown, who's president of the Elementary Teachers of Toronto, about what's going on at Thorncliffe Park. That's important. I'm Peter Sherman, in for Oakley, Global News Radio, 640 Toronto. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on at Thorncliffe Park Public School. The Toronto District School Board says 3 teachers have begun the work refusal process after dozens of COVID-19 cases were detected. Now, COVID-19 cases, you got to define a little bit. You know that the Ministry of Education decided to go into schools, spend a fair amount of money, actually, to do asymptomatic testing and find out what the real story was inside the schools, because not every case of COVID-19 manifests symptoms. So you can have teachers and students, especially on the student side, going to school, potentially being carriers, infecting people both in and outside the school, and that's what they found. They found 19 confirmed cases of COVID-19 elementary schools. In an elementary school, and that was the elementary school, Thorncliffe Park. And this is Don Mills Road and Overley Boulevard. Okay, so let's look into that a little further with Jennifer Brown. She's president of the Elementary Teachers of Ontario. Good afternoon, Jennifer.
Hi there. Good afternoon.
So this is a little bit disturbing, and I imagine that you've got some issues going on at that school. What surprises me, and I don't make these decisions and I don't take them lightly, is the school board is saying that's staying open.
Yes, it is very surprising, and we have an issue with that simply because the employer has a duty to ensure a safe working environment for all, for the students, for the staff, for everyone in that building. And what is problematic is the threshold to determine what causes a school to close or remain open is not known. It is not a transparent process. And therefore, it causes a lot of anxiety because you really don't know who among you could be the carrier. And there has been such a surge in the COVID cases at that school.
There have, it's true. And what you've got is 3 teachers out of how many, 30, who have decided that they feel threatened enough not to go to work?
Oh, it's more than 30 teachers. And in fact, already half of the staff has been sent home self-isolating. So there's 27 teachers who are isolating in isolation at home.
Right.
And that is equivalent to about 18 classes. And currently that total in students is 348 students in self-isolation because they have been exposed. And
what's the total population of the school?
The school at this time, who are there, it's 750. It's one of the largest schools in the TDSB. It's a very high-density area.
Yeah, but what you're saying is half of those people, half of the kids, are at home now.
That is correct. And there was rapid testing there, and they were not able to complete up to 30 to 40% of the students in that school. So they were able to determine who needed to be sent home and who didn't, but 30 to 40% still walk among those in the school. The infection rate continues to grow, and it has been declared an outbreak at that school for over a month. In and around the end of October, there were staff members who tested positive, and there were 5 classes that were sent home for isolation. And since then, there has not been a period greater than 2 weeks. They have not been able to maintain 2 straight weeks of no COVID cases. So therefore, it's a big problem.
I was going to say, when you get to that level, you mentioned 2 minutes ago that you don't know what the threshold is before they say we can't operate this school, at least for a temporary period. And the question is begged by the fact that if half of the school is at home self-isolating and the other half of the school is attending class, and I'm talking now about between what you said, teachers and students. What's the threshold? Do you have to send 75% home before you close the school? I'm starting to wonder, given the fact that today is December 3rd, so we're, not even 3 weeks from Christmas break, holiday break, whether there should be some reconsideration, not necessarily of every school in Ontario. There are over 4,000 of those, but certainly in the areas that are most affected, which are now Peel and Toronto, witnessed the lockdowns that we're in. What should be happening in your view, looking at it from, with your union hat on, what should be happening when Christmas break comes to an end and it's January 3rd, 4th, whatever the day is that the kids return, the teachers return? Should we be doing that in the ordinary course?
You know what the best gift would be as a return for the people of Ontario? It would be to have this government implement a threshold that is equivalent to what is outside of the school. So a 2-meter distance, physical distancing for students, and not make this about money. Make it about health and sustainability. Invest in the structures that are necessary for our students to thrive and for our education workers to be able to feel safe to return home to their own families, knowing that this government takes their health very, very seriously, that this government takes this community serious and wants to keep them safe. It is important that they look at the recommendations from the experts and put those in place. The experts say we need smaller class sizes to contain the spread of COVID. That needs to be something that this government puts in. We need additional funding for the special education. It is not the best idea for online learning. That's not the best way students achieve success. It's for some, but those with special needs need more.
Well, this is the second time in Toronto since, I guess it was in early November, Glamorgan School out in Scarborough had some teachers who said, look, we're not working for the same reasons. You obviously have internal meetings as a union, and I don't expect you to tell me your private secrets, but is there any kind of action that you people are planning on a go-forward basis in light of the fact that you're singing from one hymn book and the government is singing from another? They're saying, look, we're safe. We're going to keep on operating. We're not closing down anything, and we're not changing social distancing or positioning of desks. Obviously, ventilation has been an issue, and now it's winter, so windows are closed. You haven't got that. What you've got is, in most schools, I guess, the older ones are probably hot water, and the newer ones are hot air. But the question is whether or not everybody's getting what they need. We do have cases. We don't seem to have it rocking in any huge way across the entire province, but we have a couple of pretty nasty cases here in Toronto. What do you as a union foresee doing about this?
Well, number one, what needs to happen is for the parents to tell this government no more, that they want their kids in a school which has proper ventilation so they don't have to have the windows open during winter and being asked to dress in extra layers to stay warm and not catch pneumonia. That's unacceptable in our public schools. This is Ontario. We can do better, and the people of Ontario deserve better. We need to ensure that this government does not make this pandemic about those who have and those who do not have. Why do people need to make a choice between their health and their home? Because children cannot be at home receiving online services without an adult. And therefore, I'd like to see the government start to provide workers with paid sick days so that if the government is going to say they're not going to fix the schools and parents have to stay, then pay them to stay with paid sick days. It is important that we also recognize how this has affected our marginalized students more greatly than any place else. Our Black, Indigenous, and colored people of color, they have been more impacted with COVID-19 and the transmission rate, and the government not putting in the funding exasperates this.
You know, we have these conversations on the radio station every single day, and not specifically and only with teachers or teachers' representatives. So I thank you for joining us on this. I would have to lump you in with everybody else, myself included, and say a vaccine can't come soon enough.
Agreed.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it, and good luck with Thorncliffe Park and with all the other schools as well, to you and your students. Jennifer Brown, President of Elementary Teachers of Toronto. Of Toronto. That's important. And I'm Peter Sherman, in for John Oakley. Global News Radio, 640 Toronto. I'm Peter Sherman, and that's a wrap for the Oakley Show podcast for Thursday, December 3rd, 2020. Listen to the show weekday afternoons from 3 to 6 Eastern. Turn the dial to 640, listen live at 640toronto.com, or search the name John Oakley on Spotify.
Thanks for listening to the John Oakley Show podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe for free at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your on-demand audio.